No role plays, just real. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader.
We've never really, as a workforce, spent a lot of time on making sure we're developing good leaders.
We'll be able to share stories, experience, mistakes, failures, successes.
This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, on this episode, I want to talk about something that has become rightfully part of the work culture zeitgeist over the last year about. Should have been a lot longer, but better late than never. And we had a listener reach out to us specifically about this issue because they want to do some good work where good work has not been done in the past, and they're reaching out for some help. And the question specifically is, how are they supposed to increase the level of diversity on their team when there already is none? And I thought it's a very interesting kind of way to frame it, because it's hard to kind of recognize that you have a problem when things seem to be running smoothly. And we've talked about this in previous episodes before when it comes to high performance teams and how that works with if things are running right. How do you inherently recognize that a lack of diversity could be causing you issues? But this person who reached out clearly is in that space where they recognize that a lack of diversity is a problem in and of itself, even if it doesn't happen to be causing, blaring instances of problems in their performance at the moment. And so have you ever taken over a team that had no or very little diversity and had to increase it? Or have you ever kind of encountered this before where you thought this is a problem, I need to change it?
Yeah, I mean, as most listeners know, growing up in consumer electronics retail for the vast majority of my entire career is typically, number one, a very male-dominated environment.
Sure.
Number two, across the country, it is typically an environment that also, for some elements of the country, limits a lot of, minorities and women and things like that. So there have been many times where, even within maybe a retail store, you have a department that is maybe all men. You have a department that maybe is only white men.
Right.
Or all
women. Or all women.
Or all women.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Like, it was very common to see that kind of thing happen. Like, to your point exactly, like, it wouldn't be uncommon to see an entire operations or cashier team, be all women. And then it wouldn't be uncommon to go back into car audio and have a department that's all men. And so many times I've walked into stores and environments and such where if there was diversity, it was either very there was not a lot of it, or if there was diversity, it was almost kind of set up into sections of a larger store, a larger business, based upon whatever the reasons are. And so, yeah, when we got this message, from the listener, I was like, this is a really, number one, it's a really great question because I think it reflects their understanding of the true value of diversity. They're probably, as they kind of said, like listening to the show and hearing the data and the perspective and the dialogue, and then listening to people on our guest series and guest interviews talk about the value of diversity, and realizing, well, if I don't have that on my team, then what am I missing here? What's the potential of my team, of my own personal growth and development, of the business itself? So kudos, number one, to the listener for asking the question. Kudos, number two, for calling it what it is and saying, I don't have that on my team right now. And so, like, how do I fix this? Because, simple math will tell you that you need to have, more people that are different than those that you already have to increase diversity, which means that you either have to grow your team or potentially have less of who you have now on your team to make room for other people to come onto the team. So I think first and foremost, in my own experience, yes, I've definitely seen that. Yes, I've definitely gone through that. And I think it's a great topic to talk about because I think that it may be less common now than it was before in certain industries, but I also believe strongly, and especially because we've had people from other industries reach out to us, that it is still a major issue and concern in many industries across the workforce.
Right. I like what you said about looking at different kind of disciplines within an industry because, as consumer electronics background people, that's exactly what it was. The operations staff was heavily weighted female, and the sales staff was heavily weighted male. As a person who's done a lot of HR consulting and worked on the HR teams, I will tell you human resources is heavily weighted female. And that can be an issue when you think that because you have, let's say, 100 people working on a broader team, and there seems to be kind of a good levels of diversity in terms of gender diversity, racial diversity, diversity of thought and background across an entire team. But the team, by definition, operates within siloed kind of groups that do different things, and those groups they lack diversity. That can be the same problem, and you might not even think it's a problem because what you're doing is looking at kind of the overarching, what does the entire team makeup look like? And so I think whenever it is a problem is when the silo in and of itself has a lack of diversity. And not all silos are bad. I mean, marketing is siloed away from human resources they don't need to be playing in each other's spaces, but if you have diversity as an entire company at your home office and it looks like the numbers all check off in the Excel spreadsheet, but all of HR is female and all of marketing is male, that's still going to rear its ugly head in terms of problems when you don't have the right people in the room to help you make decisions that let you really take into account who your customer is, who your employees are, and the potential fallout of making a faux pas in those decisions, which we've seen over and over again in the news where companies who weren't meaning ill, they were doing what they thought was right, but their failure was in the lack of the right people in the room when the decision had to be made, and therefore they didn't have the right perspective saying, hey, you know what? You should watch out. This is a landmine. You don't want to go here. You want to do this instead. Having those right people in the room is key. And so when you're trying to talk about increasing diversity on your team, the first thing I think you need to do is start with who's in the room during these meetings. Don't forget what the company defines as your team. Forget what the company says your level of diversity is in terms of what you're accomplishing. Think about the meetings you're in. Think about the tables you sit around and who's around those tables with you. That's where you have to start in terms of figuring out do you have the levels of diversity that you need?
Yeah, and I think too, to fix this problem and to consider how do you kind of move forward and create teams with more diversity. Number one is to understand your role in all of this. Because if you are the leader, if you're the decision maker in regards to who is on the team, who gets hired, who gets promoted, then the fix is actually relatively easy. You have to check your own biases.
Sure.
I mean, that's the reality, right? Like if it's you and you're the one who makes the decisions, there's really nobody else you need to talk to. You just need to talk to yourself, and you need to realize, what are you doing? What are you not doing? Are you putting yourself in spaces where you can find great candidates that are also diverse? And are you being proactive with who you look for? Are you being proactive with who you select? And that type of thing. But many times in many industries, you might not be the final decision maker. You might be a part of a larger team that makes a decision. But then you have to be an advocate for talking about these things, bringing these things up, discussing these things with the decision makers to say, like, this, I feel like we're missing out here. I feel like when I look at my team or I look at our team, we tend to have a lot of the sameness, and we need to figure out ways to break that up a little bit, because the data will show that having different backgrounds, experiences, ethnicities, age, anything at all that makes us different is actually better for the whole, as we then get different perspectives of how we do the work and how we find solutions. I think when it's when you're working with a team of people, and there's not only the decision of who gets hired, who gets promoted, but who people work with on a day-to-day basis. And maybe it's potentially within the organization or the team, there's this kind of cultural element of, it feels like the sameness is what gets us our results. It feels like us being very similar in how we do our work, and how we communicate and how we work with each other is the thing. Then I think you need to spend time with your team to really talk about diversity and talk about how each person bringing a different perspective is helpful, and then expand the dialogue outside of the diversity being about opinion, and then diversity really being about definition of who we are and how we see one another.
Yeah, I like that you said that around teams where the leader might think that our sameness is why we are high performance, because I'll tell you right now, there's no such thing. There's no such thing as the sameness being what gets you high performance. You're missing a step. If you think this right now, what's actually happening is your sameness means that you are able to connect and relate and talk to each other in a way where there's camaraderie and you feel like you have each other's backs and you care about each other as people and you talk about the same things because you're interested in the same things. And when you feel that way about your team, you absolutely will get better work done. That's what happens. So it's not the sameness that's getting you the results. It's the sameness that's creating the culture, and it's the culture that is creating the relationships, which then get you the results. So the solution isn't to maintain your sameness. The solution is to understand that human beings are tribal by nature. We are. We look for things that we can relate to when it comes to meeting new people. We look for similarities, a jumping off point, so to speak. And if you have a lack of relationship with someone, you look for things on the surface that could be that jumping off point. And that could be they're the same gender as me. They're the same skin color as me. They're the same religion as me. If they have, some kind of like a cross or a Star of David necklace around the neck, whatever it is, we look for things that we can relate to because it protects us. It's evolutionary in nature. The solution is to make sure that there's enough opportunity for people who don't have those similarities on the surface to be in the room together and create those relationships, because I promise you those similarities do exist. They just don't exist necessarily on the what can we color on a piece of paper level. They exist on a deeper level in terms of what your values are, what you want and hope for your kids and for your families for the future, what you're trying to do in terms of moving up in the organization, being passionate about things like different music or the books you're reading. These are all things that will work equally well for jumping off points to create that same level of camaraderie and relationships that get you the high performance you're looking for. It just takes being purposeful about it at the beginning to start that ball rolling. It's just not going to happen naturally unless you make it happen. The other thing I want to say too is, and I love what you said about as a leader, you have a responsibility to put yourself in a situation where you are seeing people who represent different backgrounds and who are diverse. I think a big problem that plagues a lot of organizations is if you don't have a hard time finding people who want to work there, you don't feel like you have to look. If you have to look, if you're in a situation where like your budgets are tight, you're paying barely over minimum wage, and you're trying to find the best people you can, you might be able to flex that muscle of trying to find the right people all over the place because you have to do it every day to get the right people. If you can kind of just sit back and you know that 10 resumes a day are going to roll in for every position you open up, then you might find yourself thinking, oh, I don't need to go search. I got plenty of talent right here. And that might be the case from an actual talent standpoint, but if it's not the case from a diversity standpoint, then you are doing your team a disservice and your customers and your clients a disservice by not saying, stop, just because I have enough from a quantity standpoint, people looking to fill these jobs, doesn't mean I'm necessarily being able to fill them with the right people. I need to go out and search to make sure that I'm getting the right people in, because whether or not a person will apply for a role, I promise you one of the first things they're doing is they're trying to see whether or not they can see themselves in it. And if they're looking at your team or your organization and they don't see people like them, whether it be gender or skin color or religion or background or wealth level, whatever it is, if they don't see someone they can relate to, potentially many people, they're not going to apply. Consequently, if they are career oriented, and you want people who are career oriented as opposed to people who are kind of like, work for you for a year and then leave, they're not just looking at whether or not they can see themselves on your team. They're looking to see whether or not they can see themselves moving up. So they're going to look above you and above your team into the higher levels of the organization and see if they can see people like themselves there too. So you have a responsibility as a leader to make that happen, not just for your team, but to influence upward to make that happen so that you have the credibility to say, hey, you know what? Come work for me. I promise you'll see somebody that kind of reminds you of yourself.
Yeah, no, there's two things in there that I want to kind of underline. The first thing is around the idea of sameness, which I really appreciate you saying, is kind of like the sameness that you want to look for is the sameness in the commitment to the work, and the sameness of the joy of doing the job, and the sameness of things like values and integrity and trust and communication and motivation. Like, there's a lot of sameness that you need. It's just not the sameness of perspective, the sameness of experience, the sameness of background, ethnicity. So, like, again, you want to align a team, and you want to have a lot of sameness when it comes to things like values, and how you care about people, how you treat people, and your commitment to wanting to do really, really good work. So I think that's something that, as a leader, that's the type of sameness that you should be looking for. It should be really clear that when you talk to a collection of the people that work for you, there's a commonality between all of them. Somebody's like, wow, everybody that works for you is really nice. Everybody that works for you is really,
definitely.
like they're very open. Like, yes, like that's the sameness that I'm looking for. And then I think the second part of that you talked about in regards to kind of the recruiting and hiring piece of it is, like are you looking for the best of what's available or the best of what's in market? Because again, if you're in a space where you're just getting your door knocked down with resumes, and like, look, let's be honest, right now, the economy is still recovering, the job market is still recovering, organizations are still laying people off and closing down businesses and reducing the amount of people in their organization. Like, that's happening right now. So there are a lot of people still in the workforce. I see it, in every single day on LinkedIn, and that people are out there looking for work. And so I would expect that there are a lot of people looking for jobs and looking for work. But if that's all you're doing is rummaging through those that want to work for your organization and not considering the fact that there are people that are just as good, if not better than them, and that represent a much larger pool of diversity, background, and experience. And if they're really good at their job, they're probably not necessarily looking for a new one right now. If they're exceptional in their job, they're probably getting the development and the growth and the goals and the opportunities that you would want in the current job that they have. So if you're not out there talking to them or putting yourselves in those situations, then you're never going to see them show up for the opportunity for a job. That's
so true. I want to touch on another thing too that I think is really important to remember here, and that's that there are very few times when doing something that would be considered morally the right thing to do and doing something that is also the right thing to do for the business and the bottom line line up literally seamlessly. Usually it's a trade-off. Usually you to do what's right, sometimes you're putting the bottom line or the P&L not necessarily at the top. You're putting it, taking a step back with that and putting a relationship at a higher value or something else. There is truly a 100% alignment between doing this from whether you are driven by a moral obligation to do this or driven purely by profit motives. Be that person. If you don't care morally about having a diverse workforce, you can still be driven purely by a profit motive, and your actions should be exactly the same. Because the more people of different backgrounds, of different genders and different skin colors and different thought processes and backgrounds and origins, the more of those people you can have in the room when these conversations are happening around strategy and execution and how to meet your clients and customers where they are. The more people who can tell you when you're doing the right thing and not doing the right thing, who feel psychologically safe to speak up because they're not just there because of they check off a box, but they're there because they're an integral part of whatever that team is. The more those people there, the more likely you will make better business decisions and have a better bottom line. There's truly, the Venn diagram is an overlap. It is not part of it matches and part of it doesn't. It is completely aligned. And so, again, you don't have to fake anything till you make it here. If this is something that is not just inherently important to you from leaving the planet better than you found it standpoint, you can still be P&L driven and do the right thing here because it is the right thing to have these people in the room.
I absolutely agree, and it reminds me of a saying that goes something like, you can do good and you can also be good. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1 minute hack. But first, a word from a sponsor.
The 1 minute hack.
All right, for this episode's 1 Minute Hack, here's what I want you to do. I want you to sit down with your team the next time you're all together, and I want you to ask your team to come up in a group with elements you all share that you all have in common from a values or a performance or a commitment standpoint to the work, love of the work, passion for the work, those types of things. Things that people wouldn't necessarily see as commonalities from you and your team unless they spent time with you watching. Once you have that list together, I want you to challenge your team to come up with places that you can look to find people who will bring those same elements while also bringing a different perspective to the team. The first step to making sure that hiring for diversity while getting people who are going to fit in with a team is making sure you have a base level of elements where those people will fit in without necessarily having to see other people that look exactly like them or have a lot of these surface elements in common. They can connect on a deeper level, which builds stronger relationships anyway, and will lead to less likelihood of them leaving the team in a short period of time and rather integrating well and contributing to a high-performing team.
Yeah, I think it's a great 1 minute hack, and it's a great practice, defining with your own team what you all stand for, what you believe in, what you have in common, how you feel about the business, the work, the strategies, and then asking the team to be involved in selecting, the talent or going to find talent that aligns with that same thing. It's like basically saying find people that share the same joy that we have for the work that we do, but that can also bring a different perspective to challenge us to make us better every single day.
Right, because at the end of the day, if we hear a different perspective, whether or not we respond with, ooh, I don't like that, it's a different perspective, or, let me hear more, will depend on whether or not we can ground that relationship in another commonality. And if we already know that that person who's giving that different perspective shares the exact same passion for the work or the client or the customer, the values of what they want to do with their life or take care of a family member or buy a house, whatever it is that you have in common, if you can root it in that, you're a lot more likely to hear a different perspective and go, let me hear more, as opposed to let me shut that out.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.